Hello, peeps. So this is probably my last video. It's just necessary to dig deeper into Einstein's fraudulent math and make corrections about that, and also make a better understanding of what the real solution to the cause of gravity and model of the universe really is. And it just gets too technical for a video format. I'm sorry. And then there's maybe 1 in 1,000, probably only 1 in 10,000 on YouTube who really has the mathematical and educational background to follow this. And of course, if I wasn't the only one in the world who had the correct answer, the Holy Grail of cosmology and astrophysics, then I wouldn't be doing this. And of course, people are going to say, they're going to say, well, you must be out of your mind to make a claim like that. So in peer review, well, you contradict Einstein, you're going to lose your job. Ask Paul Marmot, esteemed physicist in Canada. But anyway, I worked for 16 plus hours a day. 16 was a small day for me. For at least 5 years out of 8 that I went to the university, I worked that hard and harder. And I just got very good at solving problems, that's all. And listen, the first time I heard about this Einstein stuff, I could smell a Rocky Mountain skunk. I know one when I smell one. So, I didn't actually think that I had the answer completely all these many years, but I had 50 years to think about it. And by golly, I was able to finally do it. And the whole thing just hinges on the definition of a meter. And if there is a shift in frequency of light towards the red as it leaves Earth, then the definition of a meter requires that meter to be somewhat longer. That's the definition of a meter. And the definition of a meter is not dependent on elevation. So space is expanding away from Earth, but why can't anybody see that? Because they're all feeding from the government trough, that's all. This is a huge hoax, a huge lie, and somebody who really knows math and really knows science can understand that. And then maybe a few of us are able to actually figure out the correct solution, but nobody's going to listen to us. But I'm going to give it a try. And the YouTube just isn't working out for me, so I wrote a book called The Big Bang Boozle, where I talk about spatial expansion and redshift and how the raisins really aren't expanding in the dough. The raisins are not expanding away from each other in the dough, but the raisins themselves are expanding with the dough. And it's all very mathematically sound. And so, but it wasn't until I actually finished the Big Bang Boozle book that I realized that the real serious problem, the main problem, is that Newton really wasn't the guy who derived the laws of gravitation, because he didn't understand them that well. And apparently nobody else did either. So to just blow off all this nonsense and get rid of the problem with Einstein's pervasive thievery and fakery, I had to just get down and derive the laws of gravitation for myself from the ground up. Don't ask me why I can do that, and nobody else in world history has been able to. Maybe there have been others. They just weren't able to get it out there because I've been having a heck of a time getting anybody to listen to me. But I do know the answer. And so I wrote this book, The Big Bang Boozle, and then I got to the end of it and I thought, there's still some lingering issues like this GH squared expression, change in potential energy of Einstein's in the Pound-Rebka. I didn't really cover that in the book that well. And, I just got to realize, I've got to derive these laws from the ground up and just blow this stuff off and start fresh. And so that's what I did. And I call this the Foos Theorem of G. G, what does that mean? Well, that's Newton's gravitational constant. I wouldn't call it Newton's, but I call it Foos' theorem of G because it's possible to derive the meaning of G from the ground up and come up with a theorem. This is a geometric construction. It's like the area of a circle. It isn't wrong, okay? So the cause of gravity can be defined. The correct model of the universe can be defined so that it's mathematically correct. It can fit within a theorem. Just as good a theorem as the Pythagorean theorem, just a little bit more complex, maybe quite a bit more complex and a little bit more difficult to understand, but it's still true. So I have another book out there, and really it's not very much of a book. It's about 15 pages of text or so and a couple of nice color illustrations, because you don't want a theorem to go on and on forever. Then I've got a couple of appendices there, so it comes up to about, clocks in at about 40 pages on Amazon, but the theorem itself is fairly small. But I had to address some of this stuff, Einstein's fraud and such, as I move along proving this theorem. And when I get to the end of it, of course, I realize, as simple as it is to me, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of other people. So I submitted this to, I managed to get some cooperation from my alma mater to take this theorem seriously and look at it. So you can come back to me and tell me I'm full of it. Well, I'm used to it. I can take it. But I know they won't. Maybe they won't say anything at all because it's too politically dangerous. Seriously, you can lose your job for contradicting this or questioning this crackpot Einstein, because he was a world-class fraud. And I can see that. I've solved thousands and thousands of the most difficult math and science problems. I was very, very good at it. I was so good at it that I could. So now, these many decades later, I'm able to give more thought to this particular problem. And I would know if it was wrong if I didn't have it right. I know if it was right if I had it right, and I do have it right. So for the world out there, and seriously, I'll get rich off this, but I should get rich, actually. I have put this book out called Fooss's Theorem of G, where it derives the laws of gravity afresh and completes them, which they never were, and also derives the correct model, cause of gravity, and the correct model of the universe. Seriously. And no, I'm not deluded. I was a good, strong student, an A student, and I worked very, 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 very hard, insanely hard. I was a math and science maniac. You shouldn't do that to yourself, punish yourself that much. That's what I did to myself for very many years. I worked myself nearly to death. So I understand problem solving in math and science. I understand pure science from junk science. And what I'm giving you is pure science. So hang in there, and just a second, I got to take a break. All right, where were we? Okay. Okay, this theorem it really is the holy grail of cosmology and physics. But being able to communicate that and rage against the system is probably not rage against the machine, shall we call it, the politics. I'm doing the best I can. But I'll warn you, the theorem probably isn't understandable to you unless you are a fairly proficient mathematician. That rules out the physics profession entirely. So the math departments maybe can help me a little here. If anybody has some professors in the math department that would like to take a look at it, I would appreciate that. That's our best hope, because the mathematicians should be able to figure this out. Good mathematicians. And if the politics isn't too dangerous. So if the university doesn't rule against me, I'll take that as a yes. I'll be maybe a little mildly disappointed, but not at all surprised if I don't get an answer from them. The problem isn't that difficult. A good mathematician should be able to follow along and see that it's 100% true. It is a fact. So spatial expansion is the cause of gravity, and the reasons aren't running apart from each other, but the universe as a whole is expanding in proportion to the mass within it. So I don't want to go into that. I just want to announce the book because I want to let people know it's there, and I want to save all of my explaining there. It's just too difficult to explain it well, except in print. And I've got lots of beautiful color illustrations to help. And if you've got a good mathematical mind on you, you should be able to figure it out. So maybe talk a little bit about this table in the Big Bang Boozle, where I talk about the Pound-Rebke experiment. I pick out some fraud, obvious fraud that Einstein has done there. And of course, as soon as I let this out of the bag, you know, somebody came along and overwrote the Pound-Rebke experiment, so the fraud wouldn't be showing. And the original purpose of the experiment was destroyed as well. And that was to show a change in clock speed with over gravitational potential. And of course, the definition of a meter can be the time it takes for light to travel, or it can be the number of wavelengths it takes to travel. So if there's a change in clock speed or a change in frequency over the distance in this experiment, then you definitely have a change in the length of a meter. So why doesn't anybody ever talk about that? I don't know. See, there's a war going on there, and the good guys have lost, and the charlatans and the showmen and the fakes have taken over, and of course government has backed them, and so that's why we exist in this fraud. We exist in this black hole, and my goal in life is so you can take the red pill and you can escape. And so in this table here, you know, I pointed out this formula up here is fraudulent, and it's easy to figure that out. And in the book, Big Bang Boozle book, I talk about that. One thing I don't talk about is this change in frequency, fractional change in frequency that is equal to GH over C squared in Einstein's. In other words, the fractional change in frequency is proportional to the change in potential energy between those two elevations. And it's not true. It's a lie. I didn't go into that in the book. I leave that until the theorem, which is the last chapter in the Big Bang Boozle book too. The Fooss Theorem of G finally gets into that and talks about why this is a fraud. Everything he did was a fraud. I mean, everything. It was all a tricky-dicky sort of thing. So anyway, instead of GH over C squared, which is basically change in velocity over this distance squared divided by C squared, the change in frequency, fractional change in frequency, should be equal to the change in velocity over that distance divided by C, the speed of light, maximum speed, not C squared. But anyway, we'll get into that in the theorem, and you won't understand too much what I'm trying to explain now. I'm just pointing out some of these points, some of these things that would be helpful. And in the theorem, I show the universe. I bring it down to the size of the sun. So it's a little bit easier to understand if it's a small universe. And you can see the speed of light is actually defined by the rate of falling bodies at the surface, which is equal to the rate of outer expansion. And so a smaller universe has a smaller speed of light, and a larger universe has a faster speed of light, particularly with respect to radius. The more mass the universe has, the faster it will expand and push light, propagate light outwards, and the faster the speed of light. And of course, if the radius is very large, the speed of light will also increase. And I explain this all in great detail. And in the theorem, it's very brief and very to the point, because it's just supposed to be a mathematical theorem, and it's supposed to be concise, a lot more concise than I make it, actually, by the way. But I try to squeeze in some more information in there so you can understand the backdrop of the whole thing a little bit. And it's a good read. especially if you understand the math. Even if you don't understand the math, it's probably a good read. And for $10, you can't go wrong, because I guarantee you, sue me. Well, I guess I don't have any money, you can't sue me, but I'm right, okay? This is the holy grail of physics and cosmology. This is the solution to the correct model of the gravity, correct model of the universe and the cause of gravity. This is it. Don't ask me why it's me and how I was able to do it, but I was, okay? So please, anyway, this is a model of the sun that explains how space expands, and the accelerating expansion produces the equal and opposite force of gravity. That's Newton's third law of motion, isn't it? Outward expansion is accelerating expansion is a force, and every action or force, according to the third law, creates an equal and opposite force, and that's the force of gravity. And also the accelerating expansion propagates light outward from mass. Mass isn't attracted, light is not attracted to mass. It isn't consists of photons. They don't fall like golf balls, or Einstein's first theory that they fall twice as fast. And wasn't he initially famous for proving that the light was invariant? It didn't fall like golf balls. It was invariant however you measure it. Well, no, that wasn't credited to him, or shouldn't have been anyway. That was a fact of observation established by Michelson and Morley in the late 1800s. And when Louis Essen finally gave an accurate measurement of the speed of light in 1949, this has been confirmed many, many, many times over, that the speed of light is invariant. And if you follow through the theorem, you'll see why. I explain this in great detail. But like I say, you got to have a little, it's a pretty strong algebra under your belt to be able to get there. So anyway, I'm going to sign off. I don't want to say any more about that, but buy the book, $10. And that's the first one to buy anyway, because the Big Bang Boozle goes into a lot of details, and they would be of interest to you if you understood the theorem. If you understand the theorem first, then this other stuff will be a lot more interesting to you. Otherwise, you might just be wasting your time and your money. Get the smaller book, doesn't cost very much. And if you've got an A in university calculus anyway, or if you're extremely proficient with algebra, that ought to be good enough. But you've got to have a mind that can deal with ratios and proportions and things like that, and then you'll catch on to it. So please believe me, the book is probably the best investment you'll ever make, if there's any chance you can understand it. And I've tried to make it as simple and straightforward as I possibly can. I just can't do any better than that. So, and if you say, well, you can't change meters like that. Yeah, you can. See, the definition of a meter is so many wavelengths over so much distance. And if everything expands and that wavelength increases, of course, you won't see it if you're there. If you're tending the equipment and you go up 22 meters and you take a measurement and it's still the same, if space is expanded, you won't see it. But if the guy on the ground, if he sees that there's a redshift in that light from this elevation to the higher elevation, then you'll know the space is expanding, because the meter is actually longer than it was. So every point in space has to have expanded, or the properties would change, and they don't. So this is a logical fact, okay? I'm right. There's no possibility I'm wrong, and nobody can face me down in a public debate, because I will win. So bring it on, buy the book and enjoy it. And I got to get some sleep. Okay. I got to go to bed here. So have a good day. Okay.